Before we begin today's episode, I need to be clear about a few things. This episode discusses consensual non-consent, also known as CNC. This is a form of edge play that involves consensually role-playing scenarios of force or resistance. This content may be triggering for survivors of sexual violence, and I want you to make an informed choice about whether this episode is right for you today. Additionally, I need to state clearly I am a sex therapist and educator, but I am not your therapist. Nothing in this episode constitutes individual therapeutic advice or replaces working with a trauma-informed mental health professional. If you have a history of sexual trauma, I strongly encourage you to work with a qualified therapist before exploring CNC dynamics. CNC carries real risks if not approached with rigorous ethical frameworks, clear communication, and trauma-informed awareness. Done poorly, it can cause significant psychological harm and re-traumatization. This episode is educational in nature and does not constitute an endorsement to engage in these practices without proper support, resources, and self-awareness. If at any point during this episode you feel activated, dysregulated, or unsafe, please pause and take care of yourself. Your well-being always comes first. All right, with that said, let's get into it. Consensual non-consent, CNC. For some people, it's the hottest fantasy: power, surrender, intensity. For others, it sounds like a contradiction in terms like jumbo shrimp or military intelligence. How can non-consent ever be consensual? And how do we make sure it doesn't cross the line into harm? Here's the thing. CNC is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in the kink world. It gets conflated with abuse. It gets dismissed as problematic without nuance. It gets practiced dangerously by people who think consent is optional once you're in a scene. But here is the truth. CNC, done ethically, is all about clarity, capacity, and having clear exits built into the scene. It's not about erasing consent. It's about making consent the absolute center of everything that happens. Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Misty with Untamed Ember, and today we're breaking down the ethics of CNC, how to make it work for nervous system safety, and why the off-ramps, the ways out, are the most important part of the road. If you've ever been curious about CNC but didn't know where to start, if you've practiced it and felt confused about where the boundaries are, or if you're a trauma survivor wondering whether this kind of play could be healing or harmful, this episode is for you. Because CNC sits at this really interesting intersection of taboo, desire, trauma, and power. And navigating that intersection safely requires more than just good intentions. It requires rigorous ethics, deep self-awareness, and structures that protect everyone involved. So let's talk about how to do this right, or whether to do it at all. Let's start with the basics. What the hell is CNC? Consensual non-consent is a form of edge play where participants consensually role-play scenarios that involve themes of force, resistance, or the appearance of non-consent. The key word there is appearance. Everything that happens has been negotiated and agreed upon ahead of time. The fantasy is that one person is being forced or is resisting, but the reality is that everyone involved has explicitly consented to the scene, its boundaries, and its potential escalations. This might look like role-playing a reluctant partner who needs to be convinced, or scenes involving physical restraint or struggle, or fantasies of being taken or overpowered, or dynamics where one person pretends not to want what's happening even though they absolutely do. Now, I need to be really clear about something. CNC is not a loophole for actual non-consent. It's not a way to justify ignoring someone's boundaries. It's not consent once at the beginning, then anything goes. That's not CNC. That's abuse with a kink label slapped on it. Real CNC is hyper-consensual. It requires more negotiation, more communication, more ongoing awareness than almost any other kind of sexual play. Because you're deliberately playing with the aesthetics of non-consent, you have to be absolutely rigorous about the reality of the consent underneath. So why does CNC appeal to people? And why does it need extra care? For many people, especially trauma survivors, neurodivergent folks, and people with complex relationships to power and control, CNC can be both triggering and healing, depending on entirely how it's approached. Some trauma survivors find CNC cathartic because it allows them to revisit themes of powerlessness or violation in a context where they actually have complete control. They get to script the scene, set the boundaries, and stop everything if it becomes too much. It's a way of reclaiming agency over experiences that originally happened without their consent. For some neurodivergent folks, CNC can be appealing because it creates clear roles and scripts in a context, sex and intimacy, that often feels ambiguous and overwhelming. There's something clarifying about knowing exactly what you're consenting to and what the rules are. For others, CNC scratches an itch around power dynamics, taboo, or intensity that feels difficult to access in more vanilla contexts. But, and this is a huge but, CNC also carries significant risks if not approached with extreme care. Because you're playing with the aesthetics of force and non-consent, it's incredibly easy for things to go wrong. Someone might freeze or dissociate and be unable to use their safe word. Someone might think they're okay with something and then discover mid-scene that they're absolutely not. Someone might be fawning, saying yes because they're people-pleasing or afraid to disappoint, and their compliance gets mistaken for genuine consent. And here's the most dangerous scenario. Someone might think CNC means they don't have to check in, don't have to pay attention to their partner's actual state, don't have to stop if things shift. That's not CNC. That's assault dressed up in kink language. So let me say this clearly. CNC without clarity can become actual non-consent. And that's abuse, not kink. This is not a surprise me kind of a game. If you want surprises, try improv comedy. CNC needs planning. It needs negotiation. It needs ongoing awareness. It needs built-in safety structures that don't depend on anyone's ability to articulate distress in the moment. The hotter the fantasy, the more rigorous the ethics need to be. Full stop. So if CNC requires hyper-consensuality, what does this actually look like in practice? Here's the framework. Consent needs to happen before, during, and after the scene. Not just once, not just at the beginning, continuously at every stage. Let's break that down. Before you ever enter a CNC scene, there needs to be extensive negotiation. This isn't sexy. This isn't spontaneous. This is sitting down, fully clothed, with your thinking brain online and talking through every detail. What specifically are you consenting to? What acts? What language? What levels of physical force or restraint? What's explicitly off limits? What would cross the line from hot to harmful? What are your safe words or safe signals? And crucially, are those signals accessible to you when you're in an activated state? If you tend to go nonverbal when you're overwhelmed, a verbal safe word might not work. You need a physical signal instead. What's your nervous system history? Have you experienced sexual violence or coercion in the past? Are there specific triggers you know about? What does your freeze response look like, and how can your partner recognize when you've tipped from play into genuine distress? What does aftercare look like for each of you? What do you need emotionally and physically after an intense scene? And here's the question that doesn't get asked enough. Do both people have the capacity to consent to this right now? Capacity means you're sober and clear-headed, emotionally resourced, not in crisis or dysregulated, physically and mentally able to communicate and stop the scene if needed, not being coerced or pressured or manipulated into agreeing. If someone is drunk, high, in the middle of a mental health crisis, or feeling pressured to perform or please, they don't have capacity, and consent without capacity isn't valid. Once you're in the scene, the person in the dominant or forcing role has a massive responsibility. They need to be constantly monitoring their partner's nervous system state, not just listening for a safe word. Because here's the thing, bodies can flip into shutdown, freeze, or fawn without any verbal indication. Someone might go silent, not because they're enjoying the role play of resistance, but because they genuinely dissociated and they can't access language anymore. So you're watching for, does their body go limp in a way that feels like collapse rather than relaxation? Do their eyes go blank or unfocused? Does their breathing become shallow or held? Do they stop making any sounds at all, including involuntary ones? Does their muscle tone shift from engaged to rigid or totally slack? Any of these signs means you pause immediately and check in. You don't wait for a safe word. You treat nervous system communication as primary. And if you're the person in the submissive or resisting role, you have a responsibility too, to use your safe word or signal as soon as something stops feeling okay. Not when it becomes unbearable, when it first stops feeling good. CNC only works if both people are actively participating in keeping it safe. After the scene ends, the work isn't done. You need aftercare, time to re-regulate your nervous systems and reconnect as human beings outside of the roles and process what just happened. Aftercare might look like physical comfort, like cuddling, being held, or having a blanket and water. Verbal reassurance, like you're safe, or that was play, or I care about you. Grounding practices, like feeling your body, noticing the room, or coming back to the present. And then, ideally, within 24 to 48 hours, you debrief. You talk about what worked, what didn't, what felt good, what felt edgy, whether anything crossed a line. You repair any moments that felt off. You adjust your agreements for the next time. This debrief is crucial because sometimes things feel fine in the moment and then hit differently later. Your nervous system might process the experience as threatening, even though you consciously enjoyed it. That doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It means your system needs more support integrating what happened. Here's the reframe I want you to hold. CNC doesn't erase consent. It makes consent the most central part of the scene. The entire structure is built around consent being explicit, ongoing, and revocable at any moment. If that structure isn't there, you're not doing CNC. You're just doing non-consent. And that's where harm happens. Now, let's talk about the most important part of any CNC dynamic, the off-ramps. Off-ramps are clear, accessible ways to stop or slow down at any point in the scene. They're your emergency exits. They're the difference between play and harm. And they're absolutely non-negotiable. Here's the thing that people sometimes get confused about. The whole fantasy of CNC is that one person is saying no, but really means yes, right? They're resisting, but they want to be overpowered. So how do you distinguish between role-play resistance and actual resistance? How does anyone know when to stop? That's what off-ramps are for. They're the communication that sits outside the role-play, the way to signal, I need this to actually stop, versus I'm role-playing resistance, but I'm still good. Let's talk about what effective off-ramps look like. The most common off-ramp is a safe word, a pre-agreed word or phrase that means stop everything right now. The classic traffic light system works for many people, like green, I'm good, keep going, yellow, I'm getting close to my edge, slow down or check in, and red, stop immediately. But safe words only work when they're actually accessible in the moment. And for many people, especially neurodivergent folks, trauma survivors, or anyone who goes nonverbal under stress, verbal safe words might not be reliable. So you need alternatives. Physical signals, a specific hand squeeze pattern, like 2 squeezes means stop, dropping an object you're holding, tapping repeatedly on your partner or the bed, or sounds, a specific hum or grunt that doesn't sound like the role play noises, but is still accessible when you're nonverbal. Or visual signals work well for deaf or hard of hearing folks, or anyone for whom verbal isn't accessible, having a sign or gesture that clearly communicates stop. The key is that these signals need to be simple enough to remember and execute under stress, distinct enough that they won't be confused with roleplay, and practiced ahead of time so they become automatic. Another powerful off-ramp is keeping one hand free, not bound and not pinned, so you can tap out or a signal at any time, or holding a specific object like a scarf or a ball that you can drop if you need to stop but can't speak. These physical anchors give you a tangible way to communicate even if everything else goes offline. Sometimes the best off-ramp is built into the structure of the scene itself. Time limits are great, like we'll do this for 15 minutes and then we'll check in. Or specific acts, like we agreed to X, Y, and Z, anything beyond that requires stopping and renegotiating. Or check-in pauses, like every 5 minutes we'll pause and you'll give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. These structures take some of the pressure off needing to use a safe word because there are natural stopping points built into the scene. And here's something crucial. The person in the dominant role also needs an off-ramp. They need permission to stop the scene if they notice their partner dissociating, if they're not comfortable continuing, or if something just feels off. CNC should never create a situation where the dominant person feels that they can't stop because they're supposed to keep going. Everyone involved needs equal access to the breaks. Here's the principle. The hotter the fantasy, the more essential the exit ramps. The more intense the play, the more vulnerable the people involved. The more history of trauma in the room, the more robust your safety structures need to be. Because your nervous system doesn't care about your kink identity or how hot the fantasy is. It cares about whether it feels safe. And if it doesn't feel safe, it will protect you, sometimes by shutting down so completely that you can't access your off-ramps. That's why we build redundancy. Multiple types of safe signals, check-ins, nervous system monitoring, aftercare. We build so much safety into the structure that even if one system fails, there are others to catch you. And I need to say this clearly. If you're in a CNC scene and you notice your partner has gone into freeze, dissociation, or fawn, even if they haven't used their safe word, you stop immediately. You don't wait. You don't assume that they're okay just because they're not saying no. Because freeze, fawn, and dissociation are nervous system states where consent can't be meaningfully maintained. If someone is no longer present in their body, they can't consent to what's happening, even if they consented beforehand. This is the ethical responsibility that makes CNC different from abuse. Now, let's get into the neuroscience of why CNC can be so powerful and so risky. From a polyvagal perspective, CNC scenes deliberately play with sympathetic nervous system activation, that fight or flight state, in a safe container. So when done well, you're intentionally creating activation, intensity, arousal, edge, while keeping the underlying safety of the relationship intact. Your body gets to experience high activation while your nervous system simultaneously registers that you're not actually in danger. This is why CNC can feel cathartic, especially for trauma survivors. You're essentially reenacting dynamics of danger, powerlessness, or force, but this time you have complete control. You scripted it. You can stop it. You're choosing it. It's a form of trauma integration that happens through the body rather than just through talk therapy. You're taking scenarios that once happened without your consent and recreating similar themes with your consent fully intact. That can be incredibly healing. It can help you reclaim your sense of agency, power, and choice around experiences that originally stripped those away. But, and this is critical, it can also be re-traumatizing if the safety collapses. Here's what can go wrong. If your nervous system tips from sympathetic activation into dorsal vagal shutdown, that freeze or collapse state, you're no longer in a space where healing can happen. You've just recreated the original trauma without the protective factor of agency. If you're in a fawn state, you might comply with things that don't actually feel okay because your system is trying to keep you safe by appeasing the other person. Your compliance looks like consent, but it's not. It's a survival strategy. If your partner doesn't recognize these states and interprets freeze as they're really into the role play or fawn as they're genuinely consenting, you've just experienced a boundary violation, even if everyone's intentions were good. This is why nervous system literacy is absolutely essential for anyone exploring CNC. You need to know your own patterns, what freeze, fawn, and dissociation look like in your body, and your partner needs to be able to recognize them too. So, how do you play with this kind of intensity while keeping your nervous system safe? Always have a pre- and post-scene ritual to re-anchor safety. Before the scene, do something that signals to your nervous system, we're entering a different space now, but you're fundamentally safe. This might be holding hands and taking 3 deep breaths together. It might be saying specific words like, "This is play, we can stop anytime, I care about you." After the scene, you reverse it. You do something that signals the scene is over and we're back to our regular relationship. This might be changing clothes, turning on lights, making tea together, saying specific reconnection phrases. These rituals help your nervous system understand that the intensity was contained, not a reflection of your actual relationship. Use slower buildups instead of going straight into high intensity. If you start a scene at an 8 or 9 out of 10 on the intensity scale, there is nowhere to go but collapse. Instead, start at a 3 or 4. Build gradually. Check in at each escalation. This gives your nervous system time to adjust and gives you more awareness of when you're approaching your edge. Debrief feelings after, both hot and hard ones. After the scene, talk about what came up. Not just, did you like it, but what feelings showed up? What was surprising? Was there any moment that felt off? What do you need from me right now? Sometimes things that felt hot in the moment bring up unexpected grief, shame, or fear afterward. That doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It means your nervous system is processing and it needs support. Consider working with a kink-aware, trauma-informed therapist. Especially if you have significant trauma history and you're exploring CNC, having a therapeutic support outside the dynamic can be incredibly valuable. A therapist can help you process what's coming up, recognize your patterns, and build more capacity for this kind of play. CNC isn't just fantasy, it's nervous system play. It's working with the most vulnerable parts of your physiology and psychology, and that work deserves respect, care, and proper support. All right, let's pause and get personal for a moment. Think about your own boundaries, not just around CNC specifically, but around any kind of edgy or vulnerable experience. When was a time you felt like you wanted to push the edge, to try something intense, scary, or exciting, but also wanted to know that you could stop at any time? Maybe it was a physical challenge like rock climbing or diving off a high board. Maybe it was an emotional risk like sharing something vulnerable with someone. Maybe it was a sexual experience where you were testing your limits. What made that experience feel safe enough to try? What would an off-ramp have looked like for you? Was it a word that you could say, a physical signal, a trusted person checking in, a time limit that meant you knew the intensity wouldn't last forever? Now, think about a time when you didn't have that off-ramp, when you were in something intense and didn't feel like you could stop, even though you wanted to. What did that feel like in your body? How did your nervous system respond? This is important information because your body remembers what safety feels like and what the absence of safety feels like. And when you're negotiating something as intense as CNC, you need to know what your body needs to feel both free and safe. Notice what's coming up for you as you sit with these questions. No judgment, just information. Just your body speaking its truth about what it needs. As we close this episode, I want to be really clear about something. CNC can be powerful, cathartic, and deeply erotic. It can be a site of healing, reclamation, and intense connection. But only when the ethics are airtight, the capacity is clear, and the off-ramps are always in reach. This is not a dynamic to explore casually. This is not a dynamic to try with someone you don't deeply trust. This is not a dynamic where you could rely on good intentions instead of rigorous structures. If you're exploring CNC, remember, the hotter the scene, the safer the structure needs to be. Your desire for intensity doesn't make you broken. Your interest in power dynamics doesn't make you damaged. But your nervous system deserves both fire and safety. And anyone who tells you that real CNC doesn't need safe words, doesn't need check-ins, doesn't need aftercare, that person is dangerous. Full stop. Kink should never blur the line between play and harm, ever. If today's episode gave you a new perspective on consent and edge play, make sure you're subscribed to Untamed Ember wherever you get your podcasts. And join my newsletter at untamedember.kit.com for deep dives into the messy, complex, beautiful work of navigating sexuality with ethics and embodiment intact. Until next time, this is Dr. Misty with Untamed Ember, reminding you that your desire is valid, your boundaries are sacred, and you deserve pleasure that never costs you your safety. See you next episode.